So I will start off with asking a question for everyone who has thoughts, which is, as an AI reporter, we're hearing every day concerns about, are we in an AI bubble? Are enterprises actually getting value out of all of these advancements in LLMs and generative AI technology? So I want to toss that to you all. What do you think about the concerns about the AI bubble? Is there too much hype around AI capabilities versus the realities of using it in an enterprise workflow, like in fintech? So whoever is eager to start, just go ahead.
I guess I'll start. So I'm the global head of payments for AWS, and in my role, I get to work with customers all over the world, financial services customers who use not only traditional AI and machine learning, which I'm sure everyone here knows. The financial services industry has been using that for many, many years. What is new over the last, call it 2-3 years, is generative AI. And we have financial services customers right from payment companies to larger financial institutions using generative AI for a bunch of use cases, but mostly in 3 different areas. One is productivity, improving productivity for engineers, workflow automation, things like that. Second is risk management, so real-time decisioning in terms of, from a payment standpoint, how do you make decisions and offer those decisions in a way where they are scalable and hyper-personalized. And the third is new value creation. And we are seeing a lot of our customers use generative AI for building experiences. The folks on the panel earlier talked about how small businesses are very unique in terms of the business they are in. And generative AI technologies customers are able to build use generative AI to build those experiences at scale. And that's what is exciting from what we see.
Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think just mentioned a small business. I think one of the interesting things is in every new technology, the near term is overstated and the long term is understated from an impact perspective. And from a small business, running small business, these sellers don't have time to do many different things. So they reach for tools. And if you can give them insights or give them agents to do work on their behalf, then that's kind of game changing for them as a business. And then I think that helps, broader society as well.
Yeah, I mean, AI is here to stay, so whether there's a bubble or not, it's kind of not the point. It's when you think about, like you said, from small, but as you really think about scale, that's where AI can truly change how companies get from where they are today to where they want to be in a really effective way.
Agree.
Yeah, I'm the vendor at this panel, so I'll give you a little bit of perspective from a product build. It's definitely been a year of a lot of experimentation for customers, trying a lot of different technologies. At Salesforce, the Agentforce platform, and we just recently announced our results. We're over $500 million in ARR, 18,000 customers, about 70% growth in the last quarter for people moving from pilot to production. So you're definitely starting to see that. Autonomous actions now growing at about 100% quarter over quarter. And this is really the first time, I think, in the past year and a half where we've gotten to the point where we can talk about that kind of usage, where customers aren't just doing, focused and small POCs, but starting to move into use cases in production. But those use cases are early. Most people, I think, that are doing generative workflows, that are building autonomous agents, are starting out with fairly straightforward, simple things that they can make sure that the agents are behaving consistently, they're behaving accurately, and then slowly kind of moving up the curve to more complex workflows. And certainly in financial services, you have really important considerations from a trust, security, compliance perspective that you need and require the technology to not be hallucinatory. It has to be controlled. That's really important. And then you also have to make sure that you are able to connect all of this incredibly rich data in order to actually be able to provide those experiences at scale. So there's some unique challenges, I would say, in the regulated industries that we do see. But this has been, I think, this has been a year where we're starting to see that momentum and growth, and we expect next year people are going to really start to push the needle on. Let's make some decisions. Let's make sure we're actually creating some value.
And Madhav, as a CEO of Agentforce, are there certain AI vendors that you find for the customers that you're working with are particularly helpful for certain use cases over others. And of course, I know Salesforce also builds their own technology on top of those, but you're working with a whole host of partners, right? So what are you finding for these Agentforce kind of use cases people are liking the most?
Yeah, I think the name of the game in this technology is every customer is going to have an ecosystem of capabilities that they're going to use. So for Salesforce, we're providing agentic and AI capabilities in the customer domain, in sales, in service, in marketing, in commerce, for employees that are using our capabilities, obviously for companies that also use Salesforce to interact with their customers. So that tends to be where we tend to focus. But at every single layer of the stack, there's really critical connectivity. I mean, when we think about employee experiences, Workday is a very close partner where we make sure that the agentic and AI capabilities that they have on their platform work seamlessly with ours, because many times when you're dealing with employee scenarios, you're going to cross over from things that are in the Salesforce domain to things that are really in the employee and the workforce domain. So that connectivity is important. The same thing is important at the data layer. We work with Amazon. Many of our customers obviously use Amazon at their infrastructure layer, and we have to make sure that these things are interoperable and connectable. Amazon also builds, agentic models and their Bedrock technology. So does Google. So does Microsoft. So to be effective, I think in this in the agent space, how do you make sure that customers have flexibility across these vendors, depending on what the application is, depending on what the use case is and where they're interacting with us? I think that is really the path to success here, that customers will require those things to work together interoperably in order to drive value.
Okay, great. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about Workday. And, I think many of us probably in this room have used Workday software. How is AI actually changing, especially these newer generative AI products, right? And how is it actually changing the operations with employee services as well as the financial, operations of your org at the company?
Yeah. So one, I completely agree in terms of interoperability is so core to how we're thinking about Workday is thinking about agentic, because we know that all customers need truly, or all agents really need a lot of context to be able to ensure that that we are allowing the agents to have the right data to make the right decisions, and then to bring it up to the people that actually make so that you have the human in the loop decision making for any sort of people and or money related process. At the end of the day, the CFO or the SVP of FP&A is responsible for ensuring that financials are accurate. And so human in the loop is important, but you also need to ensure that you are driving a much more effective and efficient process. So when we're looking from a Workday perspective, whether it's a HR related process or a finance related process, it's really all about how do we ensure that we are continuing to drive a real transformational process, but also doing it in a way that ensures that you have the right accountability at the right point in the process. That's something that I know our developers and our head of R&D is very, very, very focused on.
I'm curious in your own role, because we hear a lot about how one of the major use cases that generative AI is trying to apply itself to in the workforce is in finance. Coding kind of being the first one, right, where you really saw mass adoption, finance being the next. So I'm curious, as someone heading up finance, how much day-to-day would you say you're using generative AI tools, and for what specific tasks?
So I feel like I'm lucky because I work at a company that develops a planning product or an FP&A product. So we are doing a huge amount of co-development with our product team on really looking at our financial planning process and really focused on what are the business outcomes that we need to ensure and drive, and not just looking at how do I make the process faster or even make it more automated, but really focusing on how do I completely unlearn what we've done over the past 20 years and just take a totally different lens on how this business outcome should get done. So I would say we're still in a little bit of a pilot phase. We've done some small pilots with the planning team on. They're developing a real co-pilot and a chat GPT type process for our planning, like headcount planning. So we're starting with pilots, but I really see within the next year, your FP&A team will have a very different way to plan and a much more fluid way to plan with their business partners, having real-time scenario planning verbally, just in a very different way. And so I'm really excited because I get to, work on this real time. But I do see us. It's still, it's early. We're seeing a lot of where I feel like we're kind of on this precipice of, like you said, the developers. It's very clear on how you become very more efficient. We're on the precipice of where it's really going to change how finance teams are able to really drive business value.
Nilesh, similar question to you as head of payments at AWS. How much has generative AI changed the kind of work that you're doing, the processes that you're working with?
Sure. So when we work with financial services companies, right, especially financial institutions or payment companies such as Square and others, there are a few areas where generative AI is extremely useful from a payments standpoint. So payments being a regulated industry, if you keep the productivity and developer productivity and those things aside for a second, one of the biggest things that is happening in the payments industry over the last, call it 5-6 years, is the rise of instant payments. So in the US, we have real-time payments offered by the clearinghouse. We have Fed now, which was rolled out like 2-3 years ago. And one of the main things, while we all as consumers love that our money can be sent or we can receive money instantly, one of the main things financial services companies and financial institutions have to worry about is fraud and risk management. So we are seeing regular AI as well as generative AI being used quite a bit from a standpoint of mitigating fraud and proactively identifying unusual patterns. Now, so that is really important, right? Where you have to reduce the losses and try to figure out how you can alert the customers if a financial services company or a payments company finds.
And can I just ask, how much has generative AI helped with fraud detection, do you think?
So it has. What has changed is the alerting mechanisms that are available for consumers or businesses. With generative AI, you can have personalized messages. So what used to happen in the past is you could detect unusual behavior, but the message that you used to get was pretty vanilla. What is happening now is, in context, financial services companies are able to show messages to the customers that, hey, we saw such and such patterns or such and such transactions, and have a really personalized experience that they can offer to the customer. And that's where generative AI is changing quite a bit. I'll just real quickly give an example about small businesses. So what has changed is, we talk about personalization quite a bit. Now, what does personalization in the context of small businesses mean? If you're a physician in the healthcare space, your AR/AP process is very different than, say, you're a general contractor or some other small business owner. Again, personalization has been done for a while in the past, but with generative AI, the ability to build those custom experiences has become very easy. Cost of building custom experiences has gone down quite a bit, and that is what has changed with generative AI.
Willem, similar question for you. How has generative AI changed the business that you're doing at Square?
Yeah, I'm going to unpack it in a couple dimensions. First, I'll just kind of follow up on the kind of risk compliance side. I think one of the interesting things is we see kind of lots of chargebacks, disputes, and things like that, right? It's a very textual, very manual process. So having generative AI and agents help both kind of the people managing those and also the workflows between the sellers and kind of the banks helps a great deal. It makes it more personal and kind of a better experience. From a Square perspective, we kind of really see, so small businesses, the one thing they're short on is on time. Like, they just don't have time, right? They're busy, they're running businesses. So any capability that you can give sellers to help understand their business better, to make better decisions, that's where we kind of started with a lot of our AI products, just trying to help decision making and help bring kind of better intelligence to their businesses, will help them succeed. And I think the second thing is you have to look at where they spend the most time in a week or the things that they can't hire for right now, right? Staffing is incredibly tight across America, especially with small businesses. And I think if you look at that, there's things like our AI voice ordering product, which, post-COVID, many restaurants just didn't reopen phone lines. Like you couldn't call and place an order, which was just difficult to restaff. So we kind of identify these different areas and building kind of purpose-built products that one can help kind of sellers feel like they have an additional employee. So that's where we've been focused, and we're seeing a lot of great success.
Great. I'm going to ask an audience question, which is, what is the biggest hidden cost companies underestimate when scaling AI? If anyone has thoughts.
I got like two interesting ones. I think one is you can't force customers to use AI, right? So like you have to make that experience trustworthy, and if you don't get that many chances, right? To like if you give the wrong answer, or if you're asking about sales reports and you say X and the actual answer is Y. So I think that's one. It's just like a hidden cost of just trying to scale this. You have to have like enough care to build these experiences that actually work. I think the second. There's a lot of talk around just the cost of running models and things, but the industry hasn't seen a technology that's improved from a cost perspective by an order of magnitude every year, like in a long time, right? So it's like truly like focusing on cost optimizing per token costs right now, unless you're like, OpenAI or Google or whatever, right? Probably isn't the right focus. You should focus on the best experience that you can provide your customers. And then, the trends are pretty clear from a cost to serve.
The only other thing I would say on that is like there's a cost like from the customer end, but then there's also if you're scaling it for a business from as you're maybe a small or medium business, and as you're scaling, depending on what size you are, the change management of your employee base is often a hidden cost that some people ignore. And again, depending on the size of your company, that is a real focus. I know from a Workday perspective, we're very focused on change management.
Yeah, we've had, thousands of customers that have been doing this. There's really some patterns that have emerged over the last year, and I put them in three buckets. There's a big cost to trust. That's the first one, and it's always the first question. Certainly in this industry, it's really critical. How do you make sure that the experience is trustworthy? Where's the data coming from? How are you controlling it? So I think trust is kind of the first question. The second question that I think can come with a lot of hidden cost is the agent design itself. How are you optimizing your architecture? How are you making sure you are controlling the behavior of the agent for it to be consistent? And so there's a lot of design time decisions. Willem talked about the actual experience that you're building for a customer has to be rich and evocative in a way that they're going to use it, right? And if you throw out these experiences with a lot of investment and it's not compelling enough, it's going to get buried in some app or some website and no one's really going to get value. So design time, I think, is a big one. And then the third one, which is customers have gone up the maturity curve, are starting to become really important, is I need to measure the cost. Like, how do I actually observe the behavior of the agent? How do I analyze where it's working, where it's not working? I need to make improvements to that agent. Most customers, obviously, where we are, have spent a lot more time thinking about kind of just getting it designed and getting it out there. But you see as customers start to use this more, that scalability, that observability, that continuous improvement starts to become really critical so they can manage those ongoing costs even as infrastructure costs come down.
Makes sense. I'm curious about hiring. Has AI impacted the types of roles that you're hiring for? There are new roles being created because of AI. Has it? There's been some reports about, are we seeing a slowdown maybe in some entry-level roles because of this? And what is the path for entry-level workers if that is the case? But curious as to your thoughts on that, if anyone has.
Well, I can give you an example of one of our customers. It's a fairly large, global customer, and they came to us, I guess, about 7-8 months ago. They had like roughly 5,000 call center agents, and they're like, hey, we are really excited about generative AI and what it can do for our customers, and we are thinking of changing the role for 10% of our call center agents to be prompt engineers. Can you train these guys to be not call center agents but prompt engineers? And that's how they started.
Interesting.
And that created a whole cultural change within their call center organization at a global level, which is now there are these prompt engineers who are fine-tuning all the information that is happening and that the experiences that they're offering to their customers. So that's what we are seeing, which is different people are doing different things, provided it happens at a cultural level, and then that's how it trickles down to other parts of the organization.
That's a great example. Does anyone else have others of?
Yeah, I think the redeployment is a really good example where people are taking skill sets and saying, hey, we don't need as many people now doing reactive work for customers. We can put them in higher order things. Customer service is a good example. Sales is another example. I want to go back to what Willem said, though, which I think is really, in some ways, where this technology is going to add the most value. We gave this example at Salesforce. Over the 26 years that Salesforce has existed, we've had literally millions and millions of people that have reached out to us that we have just not had the ability to reach back out to, that have been interested in our products. You just imagine the amount of demand that almost every company typically will not have sufficient people in marketing or sales to be able to fulfill. Agents doing the work that the humans are not doing, I think, is actually kind of an underreported value that we're going to get from these. It's not a zero-sum game, right? We're going to be able to now create productivity and create value in ways that extend the workforce. And typically, the extension of the workforce is going to mean that we get to do more things. We get to talk to more customers. We get to engage with more customers. We get to provide that service more. And I think customers are starting to see that. And customer service is a really good example where I think at the beginning of this journey, everyone was like, oh, 80% of the customer service organization is going to go away and things like that. But really, we have like really valuable people that could be doing great work for us that are going to expand the remit of what customers are doing. And I think that's you're starting to see some evidence of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think the redeployment area is such a focus for Workday internally, but also clearly for our product, because we truly believe that our product can help our customers be able to better understand their workforce and what skills they actually have, what roles they've been doing over the past number of years at the respective company. And it is able, within our product, we have multiple different areas where we do surface up, these are the skills you have of your employee base, and this is where they could be, essentially their skills could be much more useful as you continue to be able to drive effectiveness and efficiency in your organization. So I know as a leader of FP&A, I definitely am looking to continue to think differently about the skill sets I'm hiring for, because no longer do I need someone who maybe has a CPA necessarily, because what I really need is someone who is extremely curious and really wants to understand the business.
That's interesting. We were talking about agents. I'm curious, what do you think is missing today for these agents to really be fully, integrated and more autonomous? I've been interested in reporting on agents for 2 years, which feels like eternity in AI time. I remember thinking 2024 is going to be the year of agents, and not that it wasn't per se, but I don't think we're at a place yet where we're really seeing, humans not be in the loop, let's say, for critical tasks. How far away do you think we are from really more of this sort of agent autonomous workflow? And what's stopping us from doing that today?
Yeah, I think the interesting part is, so the models are changing, especially with the new reasoning models, and like there's a benchmark called just like long horizon thinking, like how long one of these agents can actually do things, like a trajectory, and then that's like 4 or 5 hours and 6 hours, and next year it's going to be a day and things like that. So I think like one of the challenges we've had as an industry is that these agents are pretty good for some basic things, and then you add more data or more tools or whatever to it, and then it starts to degrade performance over time. That's just going to get better, right? So what's going to look like, I don't think there's any like, kind of immediate one day to the next where everything's going to be better. It's going to be this slow grind of just like constant improvement. And I think what's going to happen is that more and more tasks are just starting to get folded into these agents, right? They'll build trust with the users. They'll trust them to do more and more complicated things. And I think it's our jobs as people building these tools to kind of create those experiences for sellers. So it's hard to like predict a time frame. It's just going to be this compounding effect, and one day, probably in the next year or so, we'll just be like, oh wow, it can actually do all this stuff, right? And I think that's going to be pretty interesting. When it happens.
I think it's important to not equate the LLM technology and the agent technology as the same thing. The LLMs have unlocked this ability, obviously, to communicate with technology in natural language, and that's a profound unlock, right? We now can deploy software, we can create experiences that are very rich. So that's incredible. But in order to actually create an agent, there are critical surrounding capabilities around the LLMs that don't go away. A good example is an LLM is never going to have all of the data and the context and the content that is necessary for an enterprise to work effectively. A model is not going to be trained entirely on that. So you have to be able to supply that context. That will always be the case. The second thing that an LLM will not naturally be able to do is execute on deterministic workflow and process that is specific to the way you run your company. Right now, an LLM will get better at reasoning through a process. It will take less time. It will be more efficient in how it reasons through a process and the way we do this. But we really believe that we require the kind of creativity of the LLMs paired with all of the deterministic process and workflow that we built. Those things have to work hand in hand. That's also a really critical capability if you want to be able to do that effectively. And the experience layer, we think of these LLMs kind of interchangeably with an application like a ChatGPT or something like that. But the experience layer is actually significantly more complicated than that. We're going to be doing things on voice and video and chat and all of these different channels, internal to our employees, external. And so that experience layer also is something that I think businesses are always going to have to build. And so I think the agent technology requires, I think, robust pieces, independent of which function you're applying for, that I think have to supplement and augment the LLMs. The infrastructure layer alone is not going to get us to fully autonomous behavior, in my opinion.
I agree.
Yeah. Let me give you an example of how one of our customers is using agents. So in the payments world, payment networks and come up with different rules every month, sometimes every other month, and generally they are financial services companies or banks have to comply with those rules. So in the past, what used to happen is these rules were generally published on some website or in some documents like PDF files, and then there used to be updates to those documents, right? So V1 is rolled out in January, V2 is rolled out in February, that kind of stuff. And there was a manual process where people used to download those documents, look at what are the rules we need to comply for, and then generally there's a timeline which is you have to comply with all these rules in 6 months or 9 months or whatever the case might be. So some of our customers, what they're doing is they've built agents to download these files, which is the easy part. But look at the rules in context, which is V1 of that document says this, V2 of that document says this, and then finally look at that entire set of documents and come up with these are the final 4 rules that I need to comply with, and then feed that into the developer pipeline to make the appropriate changes. So those types of things are becoming a lot more efficient with agents and the technologies that are available today.
Makes sense. I'm curious to ask about your opinions on a study. There was this MIT study, maybe, several months ago, earlier this year, saying, I'm sure you've all seen it, that 95% of businesses don't find value in their pilots with generative AI applications in their first year. And it was very controversial. I know a lot of people push back on it. But I'm curious, what should we make? There have been other studies, too. I think there's one at Stanford saying that a lot of enterprises are finding some of the output can be quote-unquote slop, or if it's messy text, they have to go and rewrite it, and that can increase that inefficiency. Same thing with bugs in code. But I'm just curious, anecdotally, what you all are seeing. I imagine you may have a different perspective, but what do you make of some of those early reports that were kind of casting doubt on how much enterprises are finding value with Gen AI?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. So, at Block, we have an open source tool called Goose, right, that we just donated to the AI Agent Foundation. About 2/3 of employees use it every week, right? So, but I think if you would ask one of those employees, like, how much does a generative AI tool change your day-to-day, you probably wouldn't get a resounding, oh my gosh, it's like game-changing yet, right? So I think it's like hard to tell exactly how much of a day's kind of toil or whatever things that they're doing or not doing, like, checking out PDFs. Maybe if you ask that employee, they'd be like, oh yeah, maybe it's like helping this really small part. But if you compound those small things over like all the days of the week and all the employees at your company, I think it's like a lot more than we all imagine. And I think that's the hard thing to like quantify, right? So I think it's kind of a little bit more that, yes, there is going to be a big impact, but it's like not totally diffused everywhere yet, and it's kind of like accumulating over time. So I think like that's why it's hard for me to believe these studies, because my lived experience is like, well, this is actually really useful for me. But would I say all my workflows are converted to AI? No, like it's like very specific things.
It also depends on your starting point for the pilot, right? Which is
Yeah.
if you start with technology and try to look for a use case, then pilots or proofs of concept generally don't result in meaningful outcomes.
Yeah.
But if you start with a customer problem and then try to figure out the right technology, and if the right technology is generative AI, then you can start seeing results immediately.
Yeah.
So sometimes, we are all we get excited with new technologies and we try to shoehorn them into different things, and sometimes they don't work.
Yeah, I think
You start with the customer problem.
Totally.
Go ahead.
I think like in cases where enterprises are just like deploying this en masse versus trying and identifying kind of key problems that they're trying to solve, that's the difference between success and not.
I think that's a really key point. I mean, like I said, our top customers now are doing hundreds of millions of these agentic workflows. Those are effective implementations, right? They're not in the 95% that MIT quoted. But if you look at that, I think there's three things that prevent good implementations today. Number one, if you do an agentic implementation for the sake of becoming agentic, it will fail. You need an outcome, you need a KPI, you need a very clear objective that allows you to scope what that focus is. So that's number one. Number two, if you don't understand what data and context that agent requires to be successful, and what you have is kind of a boil the ocean data strategy, it's not going to be successful. You need to be really focused and directive on what context does the agent need. And then the third one, which we kind of touched on, and I think it's the most important thing, is the LLMs are not a magic bullet. It is LLM technology paired with deterministic workflow execution that really understands and can execute that process. That's ultimately going to drive value. So where we've seen customers really be successful is that they've really been targeted in making sure that those things are satisfied in these agentic implementation. Then those tend to get to scale. But if you don't have that, yes, you do tend to get stalled in that early phase.
Yeah. Julie, anything?
Yeah,
Last
so
remarks?
the last thing I would say is that we are, especially with my team, I'm so focused on what is the outcome that we're trying to solve, and really try to stay away from, I'm just trying to get done with like how I've done it for 5 years faster.
Right.
Because that is where I think things fail. Because we're not actually taking a step back and saying, no, I want to get to this outcome in a potentially very different way, and I'm open to how we do it differently.
Makes sense. Well, thank you everyone so much for being here and your time. Appreciate it. That concludes. Thank you. Yes, a round of applause for our participants, please.